Christian Allegro needs to play basically every snap going forward, in my opinion. I'm going to tell you why. Plus, what other young players does the staff maybe need to play more going forward? On Locked On Badgers, let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Ryan Harris, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. New customers, $5 bet gets you started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to get started. Today's episode, we're talking about Oregon coming up. Big game. What do the Badgers need to do to be in that one? What's left to play for this season? Plus, we're going to right now get into Curtis Holland, talk a little bit about young guys on this roster. One of the things I get a lot, Curtis, and we haven't talked since before the Iowa week, at least officially, we talk offline. But one of the things I keep getting messages, DMs, they got to play the young players. Mabry, Dilon Jones, Kyan Berry Johnson, Heiberger, Sebastian Cheeks, Christian Allegro, Tackett Curtis. Are we at the point where they need to start building for next year? And if so, which of those young players need to play more?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think for me, it's real simple. I mean, if the guys are performing in practice, then they need to play. And whoever that is, whatever that looks like, again, we don't have access to that. So, without being able to see in the facility, see who's performing, see who's playing, it's tough to make that call from the outside looking in. I would tell you that if it's true, like, Dupree is cutting up in practice and that's why he's getting more play time, then yeah, absolutely. That's how that should go down. If it's Allegro is in practice and, maybe not being able to perform as well as, say a Jaheim Thomas, who is an experienced senior and adds a lot of value to this team, then Jaheim Thomas needs to play. I mean, it's not that complicated. I do think I do have some questions as to how we're using our rotations because it's not really consistent. And so I wonder if a lot of that's maybe game plan focused or who we're playing or matchup based or what have you. But the way I look at playing freshmen is it's kind of a lot like if you were to fire your coaches mid-season. It's kind of a punt on the season. And there's still some things to play for this year. I know the last few weeks haven't gone the way we wanted. I mean, this has been an up and down season. But there's still, a bowl game to fight for. There's still the Freedom Trophy to fight for. There's still the Paul Bunyan's Axe to fight for. Minnesota, like I know people are saying, oh, they're looking better this year. They just lost at Rutgers. Again, a game that we absolutely obliterated Rutgers. Nebraska is looking like they might even not make a bowl game potentially if they go to USC and lose this week. Who knows where their headspace is going to be at when they play us. So, there's still some things that we can get done. And coming off a bye week, I think you get your team a little bit fresh, especially from the being beat up 2 weeks in a row. I think getting the team kind of back healthy, back fresh, it still leaves a lot on the table for us for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense of you can't punt on the year. So if you're playing a freshman, but he does then for whatever reason, he doesn't give you the same juice in the game. He's not executing. He's messing things up. He's missing tackles, missing assignments. It's not okay to build for next year if it means for the next 4 games you're not as good. I think that's completely on point.
Well, that weighs on the psychology of the team too, right? Because now now you're like, well, I'm just going to play the young guys, and you got senior guys who start maybe feeling slighted, feeling some type of way, maybe start mouthing off. I mean, you saw what happened with Florida State. They had I forgot what the receiver, their first round receiver last year, started saying, hey, don't go to Florida State for a receiver because you're not going to get developed there. I got developed at Michigan State. Like that kind of stuff starts showing up, right? You start hearing the negative voices of the locker room. They leak out of the locker room and the public starts getting picked up by the media, starts being circulated. Now all of a sudden you got a huge problem on your hands, right? You're dealing with, a team that's maybe split a little bit, comments all over the place and all these things. And that can snowball into a lot of negativity really fast and really crater a program. Even if Fickle is the right guy, it's tough to overcome a storm of negativity like that. And then, on top of that, now maybe you're playing freshmen. Maybe they aren't ready. Maybe they're getting beat up a little bit by Oregon. Maybe they don't make the play against Nebraska. We lose. Maybe you lose to like that starts to weigh on you because now you're like, well, I know we're just not that good. We just lost all these teams. Like we're not really, and that starts to weigh on you too. So, it's you got to kind of navigate that balance of like, do I play new guys because these guys are the future? Are they actually perform? Are they actually ready to play? And again, I don't think Mabry's ready to play. I know people have been arguing about that all over the place. I don't think he's ready. I don't think he should play. And with that, I mean, yeah, you're going to see some things back and forth. I think some fans are going to be happy. Some are not. It's just going to be what it is.
Yeah, I agree with you on Mabry. I would like to see especially when you look defensively, I don't think you necessarily need to find a role for Kyan Berry Johnson now with the slot receivers on the team. I don't think you need to find a role necessarily for Dilon Jones. I like the running back rotation as is. I do think defensively on a team that is desperately searching for just a little more athleticism, a little more disruption, I would like to see more of a full-time role for Christian Allegro. I would like to see a little bit more Sebastian Cheeks, maybe Thomas Heiberger, and in packages, right? That doesn't mean Heiberger's out there next week and he plays 50 snaps. But maybe you start to build roles for some of these young talented players. So next year they have some reps in their back pocket, which obviously helps development. We all agree playing helps develop. I would like to see more of a role in spots where this team has been really deficient because those are plus athletes. Heiberger, Lafayette, Allegro, Cheeks. And it also pairs well with a spot that has just been a major struggle for Wisconsin. So that's kind of where I'm at. I agree. I don't think it's wholesale changes. I definitely don't think it's Mabry. But I do think some of these young athletic defenders, man, I want to start seeing a few more reps. And Allegro, to me, I think he was a starter last week mostly because Jaheim Thomas was hurt. He's been so
Thomas went out.
Yeah, he's been so good, dude. Like, he needs to get starterish reps at this point going forward.
Yeah, and that's where I think you're right. And to some degree, and I think with defense is different than offense because obviously it's a different type of game. I think you can get away with playing athletes on defense maybe more than offense because it's a little bit more of a read and react as opposed to, having to know the plays, know the different looks, know what you're supposed to do on each thing, so maybe it's a little bit simpler, but and that's where I kind of go back to what I said earlier. I do wonder about some of the rotations that we've had on defense. And, specifically being at the Iowa game, obviously this has been brandied about a number of times. We played nickel defense almost exclusively the whole game, which was wild to me considering Iowa had zero interest in throwing the ball. And I don't blame them. I mean, their quarterback's a runner, so it's not like they were going to all of a sudden drop back and start chucking it all over the field on us. So that was something that was peculiar to me. And I have a lot of issue with that. Early in the year, we talked about the defensive linemen. Like, I know we're kind of light there, but why are we playing 2? And when we could be playing 3, when we could be playing even 4 on certain occasions, especially against a team that comes out in 13 personnel. And we talked a little bit about this before the game. That's where I do have questions about what the strategy on defense from Tressel and Fickell really is, because people have said, hey, even if we play 3 defensive linemen, you're still seeing Kurt Neal getting blown off the ball. You're still seeing Ben Barton. It's like, well, yeah, they're getting blown off the ball because we've been playing 2 defensive linemen all season, and they've been getting beat up all season. And then you go and you play a physical Penn State team, an emotional game, night game, and you lose. And it's a physical game where you're getting beat up. And now you got to go on the road at Iowa in a night game environment, which was by far, and again, I've been at a lot of Badger games. I've been in a lot of environments. That was by far the most electric environment I've been at in like 10 years. And that's where it's like, 1, that's an indictment on Wisconsin's home game. So it's a conversation for the offseason. But 2, it's how can you expect a team that's beat to crap to perform at that level when you are willingly putting them in a less advantageous position? That's where I look at things and I'm like, I don't really like how that's going. But then that goes into the rotation aspect as well. Like, if they're putting guys in a less advantageous position, like, why aren't we rotating, to your point, more of a Christian Allegro in the game who has been playing well and who has shown he has the ability to really step up in the future?
That's 16 tackles against Iowa. Let me ask you this, because I'm fascinated by this question. You and I had talked before the show, and even though I think I'm higher on Tressel right now than you are, we both agree that was not a good game plan on either side of the ball. Why do you think, if it's a lot of people seem to think it's really obvious, why are you only playing 2 defensive linemen? Why is Tressel still doing it? Because Tressel's not a guy who forgot how to coach. And I don't think he's Jim Leonard. I don't think he's Dave Aranda, but he's also not a bad defensive coordinator, in my opinion. Why do you think he's doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw we had some success running those types of defenses against, Purdue, Rutgers, things like that. And I think my read is very simple. I think that Tressel is a good defensive coordinator against teams that we're more physically superior than. I don't think he's a good defensive coordinator against teams that are physically superior to us. Right. And you could say the same thing about Longo. That's kind of my critique of him as well. I think he's a very good offensive coordinator against teams who are physically superior. Again, I don't think it's that way against teams that were not physically superior then. And, I look back on our offense from the Paul Chryst years, it was the same way. Against teams we were physically superior against, we dominated them. We would score 50 points. We'd run all over the field. We'd have 300 yards rushing routinely. But when we played Ohio State, we'd play a Michigan, we'd play a Notre Dame, we would absolutely be incapable of moving the football because they could stop the run. All right, that hasn't changed. And if you look back at Longo's tenure prior to him coming to Wisconsin, it's the same way. UNC would put up 50 points against Virginia Tech, whoever. Then they'd go and play at Clemson and get absolutely clamped. They go play Notre Dame, they get absolutely clamped. Right? It's when they play a more physically superior team they struggle. And that's something that I take a lot of issue with in that regard. From a defensive perspective, Jim Leonhard did a really good enough job at selling out to the run so that when we played teams that were physically superior to us, at least we could fall back on, we're going to stop the run. And college football is such that if, it's not the NFL where passing game is so high level that if you stop the run, they're going to just be able to cut you apart like it's Tom Brady. Like they don't have on average that level of talent. Iowa plays defense a lot of the same way. They say, look, we're going to stop the run and we're going to force you to beat our coverage. And if you can't beat our coverage, we're just running zone. If you can't beat it, then we're going to be fine because most college quarterbacks struggle in that type of situation, right? And so that's where, the things that Leonhard did well was that. Now, he struggled against other things that I think Tressel actually does a really good job against, like certain RPO looks. I think, we've had some good success against RPO somewhat recently. A team like a Minnesota last year or a team like who was the team we played with a good RPO game? Even Rutgers, with Cal Madison and their offense coordinator, they shredded Leonhard's defenses because his defense struggled with the read looks, right? But at the same time, they did a phenomenal job of taking away the run, of being able to kind of put you on the back foot and make you have to get us through the air. Now, teams like Ohio State could do that, but it was still more of a threat in that way.
I think it's interesting, and we could do an entire show on this, and maybe we should in the future, because I tend to think most coordinators are going to struggle against teams that are physically and athletically superior, right? I would imagine that's a trend line that's mostly accurate across all coordinators. And I go back to those Leonhard teams, and I look at those teams, they just had more talent up front. And what would his defenses have looked like if he didn't have a Keanu Benton, a Herbig, a Watt, an Orr, a Sanborn, a Leo Chanel?
It's a multifactorial problem, right? Because we don't have some of those game records that we used to have.
So we got to take a quick break here, but I think we could almost do an entire conversation on this, because I remain fascinated by the fact that what looks obvious to us isn't changing for some of the coaches. And I know there's a reason. The coaches aren't just willy-nilly with it. There's a philosophy there, and it's not working all the time. I would love to have that conversation more. We got to take a quick break for our friends of the show over at Roy. We're going to come back, talk about what Wisconsin can still play for this year, why the bowl game matters, and how the Badgers can get there. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at Return on You. Roy is a way for you to support players. Sometimes when you donate to collectives, you don't always know where that money is going to go. Roy allows you with micro deposits to support the players in the program that you specifically want to support. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to athletes you love, ensuring that all the funds go to that specific player that you choose. Unlike collectives, again, where you don't always know where that's going, you receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates during the season. The best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or does not deliver on the content, you get your money back. This week, I'm supporting John Tanjay, coming off a big-time performance, 17 points, 8 boards, 5 assists. Are you kidding me? You guys been balling out. Roy and Roy just pitched in $100. I would love for you to join us. Even $10 makes a difference. Let's show John Tanjay the love and help keep him connected to the school. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets the team up for success. Download Roy now and join the NIL game with no subscription and no fees. Make sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and on X. Roy, support the players, change the game. All right, let's jump back into this conversation with Curtis. Talk a little bit about what's to play for this year. Big picture, got to get to the bowl game. I think that's vitally important. You get the practices, you build some momentum. That streak matters to me. It matters to a lot of people. What are you looking at? 3 games left, sorry. What's left to play for here?
Yeah, I think people that say, oh, the bowl game doesn't really matter, I think those are people that are just sort of being a little bit defeatist in the sense that, I don't want to feel the pain of maybe losing it. Because, this is one of those things you can look at. I'm, a Wisconsin fan. Yeah, we have the longest bowl streak. That's pretty cool. That's a cool thing to have. So definitely the bowl streak is something you want to keep alive. I do think having some additional practices, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the portal in the offseason. I'm very confident in saying that I don't think the team we have right now is going to be a lot of the team we have next year. I do think we're going to lose some guys from last year's class that – it's probably going to hurt a little bit. I think, there's probably going to be some guys we lose that we don't want to lose. But that also opens up the door for us to gain some people that maybe we didn't expect or maybe didn't think about that could add a lot of value. Think about Indiana last year. They came in, all of a sudden they bring in a bunch of guys from James Madison with their coaching change, and they're at 10-0. So you never know. You could always bring in some players that maybe, like Elijah Hills, for example. We weren't having him last year. All of a sudden he comes in and he's been a revelation for our defense. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword. And I think that the good thing about Wisconsin is that we're still one of the premier programs in the sport. I know some fans don't really always understand that, but Wisconsin is a top 20 brand in the sport, and there is a lot of value there. And Madison is an awesome place. A lot of people love it. So, there's a lot of upside to that as well. But in terms of playing for too, I mean, think about it. You still have Nebraska. I know that's a sort of faux rivalry, but it's still a rivalry. We've dominated. You want to keep the Freedom Trophy at home. You got Minnesota. I don't really care if we're 1-11 or 11-0. Yeah. I still want to beat the shit out of Minnesota. So, so that to me, it's like, obviously you want to win that game. I don't really care. Like at that point, like that game to me is the game you need to win. And so, yeah, you're still playing for that. And listening to the pressers this week, obviously the coach won't say otherwise, but I do feel like it sounds like the team is still invested. There's still good leadership on this team. It doesn't sound like they quit. I mean, even watching them against Iowa last week, it didn't look like they quit. It just looked like they were physically exhausted. It just looked like they didn't have anything left in the tank to really perform at a good enough level in order to not get run over by what was a solid, Iowa offense. I don't think they're 32 points better than us. I don't think that they're even a particularly great team. I don't know if we're a particularly great team either. So I think it's just one of those things where it's like getting this bye week now, I think helps. I think it helps kind of reset, after a loss that, quite frankly, after the second quarter really wasn't a game anymore. You kind of take that tape and burn it. There was nothing to learn from it. There was no big macro takeaways from that game that you can look at and say, oh, this changes my perception. No, it was just one of those games where we were physically beat down, we were emotionally exhausted, whatever, and you could see it. They were just slow. So, we'll see if they're able to turn it back on this week against a number one team. Again, now you're playing the number one team in the country. I think this is the last time we did that. Was my freshman year when we beat Ohio State. So, it's one of those things where it's like, this will be interesting to see, if the team is up for this and how they want to play. And looking at this week, I don't think this is a game where Oregon blows us out, specifically because of what I just talked about before. I mean, they haven't had a bye since like week 3. They've played a bunch of games back to back to back to back. They have a lot of talent. They're physically better than us. I do think they beat us, but I could see them coming in and playing slow. You got to travel 2 time zones. It's going to be a cold game, night game at Wisconsin. Not the easiest place to play in the world, even if the fans maybe aren't all the way invested as we would have been in early in the season. And, you saw last week they played a clunker against a Maryland team that, quite frankly, isn't better than us on any of the lines of scrimmage either. So, it'll be an interesting game to see. Are we up for it? Are we ready to play? Are we able to compete? And there's that heart there, and that'll be definitely something I'm looking for on Saturday.
Well, you're right too, man. It's a great point with the bye week. That could not have come at a more needed and desperate time for this team to recover and get ready for another big emotional game, because the night games in Camp Randall are big deals. Like, there's a lot of emotional energy invested into the night game against Penn State. You lose that, then you head to a night game against Iowa on the road. That's just a bad matchup. And now you get that week to kind of get your breath, get healthy, take a breather, and then welcome an Oregon team, to your point, that's played 8 straight games without a bye. I want to go back to kind of playing for. So you hit it on the rivalry games, huge deal. I think there's a momentum factor too. You're finishing off a recruiting class. You're already recruiting for 2026. You're trying to get people excited about the program. Like, that matters now. Marketing, NIL, boosters, donors, all that stuff matters. And you want to finish this season strong. You want to beat Minnesota. You want to show those recruits that, like, this vision is still happening, because we live in a very fluid time with athletes, and it's really quickly to lose momentum. And then you lose momentum and you can lose recruits. You can lose players, you can lose boosters, you can lose donors. So I just think from a momentum standpoint, there is a ton to be gained from finishing this season strong, showing well against Oregon, and then beating a Nebraska or Minnesota. You go into that bowl week, you feel a lot better. You get those practice really young players, and then you can kind of springboard into next year with a different looking roster. To me, that's what you're playing for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we kind of did that last year. I mean, it was almost the exact same situation. We were let's say Oregon's a loss. I mean, we had lost to Northwestern. We were 5-5. We didn't really know what to expect going against Nebraska and going against Minnesota. And then we ended up winning both those games. And we were kind of riding a little bit of a mini high for a while. I don't know how much that really mattered when it came to this season, looking back on it reflexively, but it definitely helped in terms of recruiting, in terms of, energy for the program, positivity going into the offseason. And that, like I said, like you said, that definitely matters. I do think that in terms of recruiting, I don't know how much the rest of the way this season plays out affects the 25 class. I think where you're going to start to see that is maybe the 26 and 27 classes moving forward, because if we continually don't perform at the level that we're expected to, that's where I think it affects more long-term, because I think the staff can still sell what they did at previous stops. They can still sell some of the things that they're working on here. And like, hey, we're not all the way there yet. We're still trying to do X, Y, Z. We don't have all the pieces in place, whatever. I do think this staff is a very good recruiting staff that knows how to really connect with players and get them in front of the school and get them to the school and things like that. So I do think that, in the short term, I don't know how much that affects our current situation, but I do think long term, that's where you want to have that success.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it has a big impact outside of the fact that you have a couple really big time 25 prospects coming into campus this weekend. It's not the be all end all if Oregon beats you, but the energy and the excitement, the game day visit goes way down if you lose 56-3. Right. Like yeah. I talked to recruits that were at the Penn State game, and they talked about how great the environment was. Well, that environment wouldn't have been that if we got rolled. Right. So I think it's important if you can compete with Oregon, then you showcase the environment, and then those players have a little better taste in their mouth with it. But I hear you. I don't think outside of that it really impacts the 25 class that much. I agree there. We're going to take one more quick break, come back, talk about that Oregon game specifically. Like, what's the game script to maybe Wisconsin keeping it closer? And is Curtis a little surprised at the line being only 14 when most of the public thought it'd be higher than that? That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. First, a quick break for our friends of the show over at FanDuel. All right, we're going to take one quick break for our great friends of the show, and then we're going to jump back into this conversation. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our incredible friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is awesome. Right now, NFL fans, if you bet $5, you get $200 bonus bets back guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com is incredible. The official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, the biggest sportsbook out there. They are amazing and awesome. And you know that feeling when you hit a home run bet, that 3-team parlay, that 4-team parlay, maybe it's a 5-teamer, and you're sealing the deal with Tyree Walker, reaching over the end zone as you're screaming in the stands, seeing the dollar signs raining from the sky. I mean, I don't know that feeling because I don't ever hit parlays, but I'm sure there's people out there that do. And if you're going to hit those parlays, head over to FanDuel.com to do it again. A $5 bet gets you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Spice up your weekend. Do it responsibly as always, but it is the best platform. Parlays, teasers, future spreads. If you were betting on the Badgers, this is the place you have to do it. Again, do it responsibly, but spice up your weekend with the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. That's over at FanDuel.com. All right, let's jump back into this show. All right, Curtis, let's talk a little bit about Oregon, a little more specifically. We talked about why it might be at a bit of a slow start for Oregon, right? Coming off 8 straight weeks, they haven't had a bye in a while. This is not a Wisconsin team that's played particularly well. So it's the number one team in the country. It probably isn't going to get their antenna fully up the way maybe an Ohio State game would or Penn State, something like that. Line is minus 14 for Oregon, plus 14 for Wisconsin. Are you surprised the line opened where it is?
No, I mean, one, it's one of the higher lines that we've had, first us all season. I can't remember what the Alabama one was off the top of my head. I think it was right around 15, 16 maybe. So not too dissimilar to that. I don't think that, that line is too surprising to me because I think Vegas probably sees what I see, an Oregon team that has, outside of maybe the Ohio State game, really sort of played with its food at times this season. They've been a good team, a dominant team, but they haven't always looked it. And now you got to go travel across country to a traditionally difficult place to play with a team that, while granted, we're not really physically where we need to be yet, they haven't really given up on the season. And we talked about this in the last segment. But the way I would look at it is think about it like this as a Badger fan, right? Going into Northwestern, how do you feel when you go into a game like that as a Badger fan? Not great. Now that's a team you should physically dominate every time you play them, right?
Frustrated and anxious would be my word.
And so as a Badger fan going into a game like that, my first thought is, all right, are we going to mess this up? Are we going to play super tight and not do well, right? Oregon probably is in a little bit of a similar boat there. It's like, we got to go across the country to a difficult place to play traditionally, where they play hard, they play physical. Who knows? That could be a game where I think maybe they're again coming off of 8 games that they've played straight. They didn't look great against Maryland last week. They're not going to get drastically better traveling to 2 time zones to come and play at night in a cold environment. It's not like they're going to be all of a sudden way better. I forgot. I don't know if it was Tez Johnson or which receiver was injured.
It's not Tez. It's their more big play guy. Tez is still playing.
Whatever. Either way, since he went down, they're not taking as many deep shots. I do think our secondary does actually a pretty good job of staying over the top on teams. So, they'll probably have a lot more underneath stuff. And if they play a little bit more underneath, that's where they can potentially make some mistakes if they're not super crisp. And I am curious to see how we are offensively. Can our line get push? Obviously last week, like I said, I think the offensive line was sort of beat up from Penn State, Iowa back to back. But outside of that, we've done a really good job of getting push on every team we've played. So, can we continue to manufacture push over what I think is a very athletic Ohio or Oregon D line, but I don't know if they're big road grading, run stopping D linemen. So and last week, again playing Maryland, it wasn't like they had the best game ever. So there might be some opportunity for us to maybe get a couple cheap scores, maybe keep this game closer than Oregon fans would want, keep it a game going in the second half. And I do think that Oregon is a better team. I do think they pull away from us. This is the number one team for a reason, and they do have a lot of athletes. But I don't think this is going to be some game, like maybe even against Iowa or against Penn State, or even against an Alabama, where it's like we're just physically dominated.
Does it feel like a Penn State game script where the game is close and then Penn State just kind of pulls away at the end, just a little too athletic, a little
similar? I think it's more of an athletic than a physical, win. I think it'll be more their receivers getting off of, maybe breaking a tackle in space or just getting enough to kind of run around the outside and get upfield and score a touchdown, something like that. Maybe us missing one tackle on their running back who can take it to this, something like that, where it's not like we're getting, they're getting 10, 20, whatever. It's more like maybe they get 2-3. And then you get a 50, that's kind of how I see sort of the second half of this game going. And I do think that, from an offensive perspective, I do think that we are limited with what we can do with Locke and Tawi right now. I don't think that we have the offensive firepower really capable of upsetting a team like this. I do think that if we're able to run the ball and sort of control the clock, similar to how Badger teams have played in the past, that we can make it a game, we can draw it out, and we can get some opportunities, because the more hitting we can do, I think the better our running game will be. But that said, I do think that this is still a very good Oregon team that's going to give us way more than I think we really want to see. But I do think it could be a game where maybe they don't play their best game and we got a shot.
One of the issues for me, if you're trying to find the road for a Badger upset or an opportunity for a Badger upset where it's close in the fourth quarter and the Badgers have a puncher's chance, Wisconsin just doesn't force turnovers and they give the ball away too much. And it's just, if you're going to trip up Oregon at home, you got to be +1 or +2, I think, in the turnover battle. You got to have a special teams play, and Wisconsin hasn't been great there either, right? They've had a couple muffed punts. Outside of Atticus, they haven't been great on special teams. So I don't find a great path forward because Locke is giving the ball way too much, our receivers don't catch the ball, and we're not disruptive enough on defense. So without that turnover battle winning, I don't think we can trip up Oregon.
Yeah, a lot of the way this upset would happen is a lot of it's on Oregon. And that's, you never want to be in a position where it's on the other team to make mistakes in order for us to win the game. But that's just the reality. It's on Oregon. They have to make mistakes. They have to not be all the way mentally in the game. They have to miss blocks. They have to have turnovers. They have to make a mistake on special teams. And when when the way for you to win is on the other team, it's never a great strategy. Yep. Like I said, I think we have enough physicality. I do think we have enough athleticism. I know it didn't show against Iowa. A number of reasons as to why I think that's the case, but suffice to say, I do think we have enough physicality, enough athleticism that we can at least keep it close for a while. We can stay in the game, assuming that the team is not all the way bought, or assuming the team is still bought in to what we're doing, and I think they are. I do think we can keep it close for a while, but again, I think it kind of falls on Oregon making mistakes, and you never really want to be in that position.
Yeah, I agree with you. They have to play down to our level because if they play at their highest level, we cannot play up to that level. Not yet. No. So they have to play down to our level. I agree. He is Curtis Allen. This has been Locked On Badgers. As always, appreciate every single person for tuning in. I love having Curtis on because he's always going to swim kind of in his own lane. He's not going to flow with what everyone's saying, and he's going to do his own thinking, his own reasoning, which is always why we love having Curtis here. When you're done here, go check out Locked On Big Ten, all the biggest stories in the conference over on the Locked On Big Ten channel. Thank you again for tuning in on Wisconsin.